People who believe in the existence of God are sometimes charged with limiting science, that is, with lazily saying that God is the explanation, and therefore we do not need another explanation. While Christians may sometimes be guilty of this sort of thinking, many acknowledge science as the means by which God created the universe. For one to say that because we understand science that therefore we do not need God is like the one who says that because we understand engineering that therefore we do not need Henry Ford. Ironically, metaphysical naturalists, or those who believe that the natural world is all there is or ever will be, do not realize that their own criticisms can be charged against them. I think there are at least 6 reasons that metaphysical naturalism limits science. 1. Metaphysical naturalism leads one to commit naturalism of the gaps. Let me preface this a tad. There is an infrequent error that Christians make known as God of the gaps. They will say that because one cannot explain some phenomenon, that therefore it must be God. But as science discovers more, it closes those gaps of knowledge that were once filled with God. For once to say that the natural world, for one to say that the natural world is all there ever is will inevitably lead one to make the very same mistake. The naturalist will say that while they cannot explain something, surely there will eventually be a naturalistic explanation within the natural world. They readily accept any explanation so long as God is not attached to it. Thus, they have filled their gaps in knowledge with metaphysical naturalism, and they commit naturalism of the gaps. Uh, Secondly, metaphysical naturalism lacks explanatory scope. Suppose somebody were to say, as I indicated in my introduction, that because they understand thermodynamics and engineering, that therefore they do not need Henry Ford. Their thinking is clearly flawed because they think that the discovery of a mechanism nullifies the need for an agent. This is precisely what the atheists have done. Now, if there is anything that requires agent causality, the atheist will miss it. As an article of faith to metaphysical naturalism to atheism, is precisely to limit the scope of causality. Thus, atheism and metaphysical naturalism limit science. Third, metaphysical naturalism closes minds. If a person begins with the conclusion that the natural world is all there is, or ever will be, they interpret everything in light of that conclusion. It becomes a presupposition, and therefore their mind is closed to evidence that is presented before them. Perhaps the most prominent example of this is David Hume. He suggested that if a wise man were to see a miracle, he ought not believe it. Thus, he literally suggests that people deny what they can see plainly. This is the epitome of having a closed mind. That is what metaphysical naturalism necessitates. In contrast, the Christian is open to natural science or transcendent agent causality. But the presupposition of the naturals do not permit them to follow the evidence where it leads. 4. Metaphysical naturalism is unjustified. For one to suggest that the natural world is all there ever is or will be, it is a positive claim for which we've got to have some evidence. As Christopher Hitchens pointed out, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So if one is to assert that the natural world is all there is, they need some evidence. But there is no evidence for metaphysical naturalism. Thus, scientists who work within the framework of metaphysical naturalism is working with an unjustified framework. For us to start with false presuppositions, we will ultimately end with false conclusions. That is what metaphysical naturalism leads scientists to. Five, metaphysical naturalism makes little sense of the rational intelligibility of the universe. The very fact that one can do science presupposes that the universe is intelligible. That which can be comprehended must have meaning. Nonsense cannot be comprehended. Indeed, the very assumption that the universe would be rationally intelligible came from belief in God. Men expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver, as C.S. Lewis said. But what good reasons are there to think that the universe would be rationally intelligible on metaphysical naturalism? It seems to me to be yet another unjustified assumption. Perhaps our perception of intelligibility is a consequence of the human desire to seek patterns where there are none. Therefore, metaphysical naturalism severs science, undercutting the very foundation of the pursuit of science, the rational intelligibility of the universe. 6. Metaphysical naturalism makes little sense of human intelligence corresponding to the natural world. As the physicist Dr. Lawrence Krauss pointed out on several occasions, the human brain is not evolved to do science. The human brain did not evolve to grasp quantum mechanics. On metaphysical naturalism, the human brain evolved for one sole purpose: survival and the propagation of DNA. In the words of Richard Dawkins, that is its sole reason for being. But then why should we expect the human brain to grasp truth? If metaphysical naturalism is true, then the human brain was fine-tuned to survive, not to know truth. This is the point of perhaps the greatest living philosopher today, Dr. Alvin Plantinga, in his evolutionary argument against naturalism. And that is why Charles Darwin said, "With me, the horrid doubt always arises about whether the convictions of a man's mind which have been developed from the mind of lower animals are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are convictions in such a mind?" Or as one blogger said, "It might be the case that we are just drifting in a sea of madness, thinking that we establish truths when we hear other fools recite them." Metaphysical naturalism seems to undermine the most important tenet of scientific pursuit: man's capacity to pursue science.